Well, I guess third time is the charm because this is the third attempt at this video. The first one, I forget what went wrong. The second one I looked terrible in because I was leaning down and my face was all shadowy, and then I said to Brian, do I look fat? And he's like, if you want to do it again, you should. In other words, yes, you look terrible. You should probably not post that for the world. So this video is going to be for Jacqueline, who wants to know how to make the edges of her crochet straight. What I have done so far is I've taken, oh, actually it looks like I've pulled the whole thing out. But I had taken it and I had crocheted 30 and done a first row of half double crochets. So instead I'm going to crochet, make a chain of 10. This is because just for an example. And it doesn't even actually matter how many. Just enough so that you can see what's going on. The reason I get straight edges and Jacqueline, you do not, is because over the course of the 20 some odd years that I've been crocheting, I must have realized that this wasn't working and fixed it accordingly without ever really even realizing it. I had to actually look up how you get straight edges because I do get them, but I guess I didn't ever realize what I had sort of changed to make that happen. And I once made an entire afghan with 8 skeins of yarn, and when I laid the whole thing out, the edges were horrible. But actually, it was only one edge. Like, one side was fine, and the other side was a complete mess, and it was bad. So I pulled the whole thing out, and when the kids got home from school, there was just a giant ball of yarn on the sofa, and they were disgusted with me. But I am the queen of pulling things apart and doing it again. I think maybe that started, well, it started before beauty school, but that was my beauty school teacher's favorite phrase. Oh, looks good. Take it up. Do it again. So that's what I do. Take it out and do it again. I've chained a few here. I'm just using cotton yarn. It's a fairly small, like a fairly thin yarn, and it's nothing special. And it calls for a 3.25 crochet hook, which, well, on the back of the thing, on the back of the skein, it's for knitting needles. So it's 3.25 millimeter knitting needles because the world is biased towards knitters and we crocheters get the shaft. So it's the same thing. It would be a 3.25 crochet hook. So instead of looking for your letter on your crochet hook, you have to look for the millimeters. This crochet hook happens to be a 4 millimeter one because I crochet tightly, and it would be harder for you to see what I'm doing with the actual correct size. So I've crocheted a chain, and I'm going to want to do another row of whatever, either single crochets, half doubles, doubles, trebles, etc. I know, Jacqueline, I think that you were doing the half doubles, or no, rather, you were doing double crochets. Those tend to look stupid around the edges, and the reason is the way patterns read and the way you are generally taught to crochet is to, when you get to the end of your row, if you're doing a double crochet, you chain 3 and you turn and you skip the first stitch in your previous row and crochet into the second stitch of your previous row, and that chain 3, that turning chain, is supposed to count as your first stitch. And what that does is it gives you a great big hole at the end of your work, and it also gives you really stupid looking sides. And I think that's what you notice it more with your double crochets because it's a bigger turning chain and a bigger jump. Whereas with half doubles and singles, it's not that, like the height of the stitch isn't that great, so it's not as obvious an issue. Let's see, I'm almost to the end, but I apparently had a knot in there too. So I'm getting to the end of this work. I just did, the first chain and then a row of half double crochets. Half doubles, my go-to stitch. So in this case, I'm going to chain 2, bloop, bloop, and I'm going to turn my work. And the way that people are usually taught, and I don't know why, is to skip this stitch right there, that first one, and to half double crochet into the next one. So if you do that, you're going to have a hole at the end of your work, right there, and your stitch is going to lean, and which means your edges are going to lean. So instead of doing that, still going to chain 2 because you need to be able to chain so you can turn your work and it doesn't get all twisted. But I'm going to half double crochet into this very first stitch right here. I think that knitters are the ones that came up with the idea to chain and then skip the first stitch and count your chain as your first stitch for the next row. I think it's a conspiracy so that the crochet stuff looks like crap and the knitting stuff looks better. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. Leave it to knitters to come up with something like that. So you're going to want the exact amount of, you're going to crochet into the exact amount of stitches from the previous row as you actually crochet. There's not going to be any skipping or any of that nonsense. So I'm going to crochet back across so I can show you that it will make a nice straight edge. Isn't it exciting watching me sit here and crochet? La la la. I also mentioned in the last video that I deleted because I looked terrible, that when I want really, really perfect straight edges, or I'm looking for a perfect square, granny squares are always my go-to. And they're not just granny squares, they're not just for grannies anymore. They're not, you don't always have to have the big holy ones, you know, that you think of when you think of a granny square. There's, you know, you can make solid ones and you can make really lacy ones if you want to, and they're actually quite pretty. Alright, so I crocheted all the way to the end into the very, very last stitch. Don't skip that last stitch. It's tempting to, don't do it. I'm going to chain 2. I'm going to turn my work. And again, I'm going to go right back into that very first stitch from the previous row. And you see how, I can't see because I can't see through my own hand, but do you see how the work is nice and flush there? It's nice and squared up. Whereas, had I skipped it, I again would have this big hole, and when you pull your work down, you end up with it slanting. And what that gives you is, oh, there, you see it? You end up with it slanting, and that gives you a nice triangle, and that's not what you're looking for, I understand. So that should hopefully clear that up for you. If it doesn't, let me know, and I will try and see what you're doing differently. I don't want to say what you're doing wrong, because I'm sure that you're not doing anything wrong. I'm sure it's just all part of the giant conspiracy of knitters out there that are telling you how to do things differently so that you end up with crooked sides. Alright, let me know how this works for you, okay? I will check in with you tomorrow.